Velyka Novosilka is expected to fall swiftly. Though less familiar to the Western audience, this town has played a pivotal role in the Ukrainian defense for 3 years, acting as a barrier against Russian advances in southern Donbass. Following a steady approach, Russian forces have successfully encircled the town from 3 sides, with the local airport captured over this past weekend. The assault on residential zones has commenced, effectively cutting off supply lines for Ukrainian defenders. It is a bitter twist of fate for Ukraine that Velyka Novosilka was once associated with hopeful narratives just a year and a half ago. The location marked one of the 3 launch points for a major Ukrainian counteroffensive in the summer of 2023. Utilizing Western battle tanks for the first time. Newly formed Ukrainian brigades advanced southward from Velyka Novosilka through the Mory Yali River, capturing several villages. However, progress stalled after approximately 10 kilometers, leading to the counter-offensive's failure and the loss of all previously gained territory in the valley. Velyka Novosilka stands as a symbol of the changing tides of this war, alongside a remarkable history that is now under threat of erasure. Founded in the late 18th century by Greek settlers from Crimea and the nearby coastal regions, the area retains remnants of its diverse heritage. Even as late as the Soviet era, around 30% of the population identified as Greek. The echoes of this rich history are still present in place names and the earlier settlement by Crimean Tatars, as reflected in the names of the contested rivers Mory Yali, Shaitanka, and Kasalach. So my friends, today's video is focused entirely on the current disaster facing the Ukrainian armed forces in the south of Donbass, i.e. the encirclement of Velyka Novosilka. So after I give you a brief overview, followed by a quick analysis of the recent Russian advances over this past week that has led to the current debacle, I will go on to a more critical assessment from a Ukrainian journalist about what really caused the city to collapse. But before we get into it, I ask that you continue to help support this channel by joining the exclusive membership community and gain access to rare footages, content, and media that is either barred or purposefully hidden from the mainstream media. For instance, just yesterday, I posted a clip from RFK Jr. talking about the COVID-19 virus being ethnically targeted, as well as some graphic footage from the Velyka Novosilka front. Your membership also helps support this channel on a more consistent and monthly basis. And if not, then I appreciate all super thanks donations. So with that out of the way, no more delays, and let's get into it. Velyka Novosilka's geographical position, surrounded by 3 rivers, offers defensive advantages that have now turned into a trap for Ukrainian forces. The crucial road connecting the provincial capitals of Donetsk and Zaporizhia has fallen under Russian control, limiting escape routes. The remaining Ukrainian defenders face the grim choice of fleeing on foot through fields and using makeshift ferries across the Mory Yali River, leaving behind heavy artillery. Reports from Kremlin-aligned military correspondents indicate that the Ukrainian withdrawal is chaotic and incurs heavy losses, yet resistance persists. Efforts to provide aid to the encircled troops and establish a retreat have seemingly faltered, as evidenced by footage of a destroyed armored vehicle targeted by Russian drone forces. The current situation mirrors the costly retreats witnessed at Avdiivka last year and Vulhedar in October, where high command delays led to disastrous outcomes. This has no doubt ignited frustration among Ukrainians, who feel that lessons have not been learned. Influential frontline observer Yuri Butusov has criticized the military leadership, particularly targeting Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky and the General overseeing Donbass operations, Alexander Tarnavsky, for perceived blunders. Regardless of accountability, Russian troops currently enjoy a clear advantage in both numbers and equipment. Following the imminent fall of Chasiv Yar and Velyka Novosilka, they are likely to expand their territorial gains significantly. With minimal geographical barriers north of Velyka Novosilka, an advance through the Mori Valley toward the border between Donetsk and the Dnipro provinces is anticipated approximately 20 kilometers away. Gaining full control over the Donetsk province is among the Kremlin's primary objectives, and it now seems within reach. An important question remains whether Russian forces will push into Dnipro province from Velyka Novosilka, signaling even broader ambitions for territorial expansion. So how did we arrive at this debacle for the Ukrainian army in southern Donbass? Well, in mid-January, a group of Russian armed forces advancing on the village from the southwest captured the villages of Netskuchnoye and Vremivka. This deprived the armed forces of Ukraine of the opportunity to cross the wet Yali River, which separates Velyka Novosilka from the mainland. From the north, the district center has been cut off from the main forces of the armed forces of Ukraine for several weeks. The Russian armed forces, having repelled Ukrainian counterattacks, came to the river near the village of Novy Komar. It is not entirely clear what forces remained with the armed forces of Ukraine in Velyka Novosilka itself, but they will probably not be able to resist the Russian assault. After several weeks of inaction, units of the Russian armed forces were able to enter the eastern outskirts of the district center. Probably, the small garrison of Velyka Novosilka still has the opportunity to leave the village, but the Ukrainian military risks suffering losses, especially in equipment and heavy weapons, even during the offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area in 2023. In the more favorable summer months in terms of weather, tanks and other equipment sank while trying to wade the Mori Yali. The capture of Velyka Novosilka will allow the Russian group Vostok to advance on the Donetsk-Zaporizhia highway on a broad front, displacing Ukrainian troops to the west of the outskirts of Kurakovye, which has now been occupied by the center group. And now let's get into the meat of today's video, which is what the Ukrainian journalist Yuri Butusov has to say about the disaster. We will talk about the operational encirclement of our troops in Velyka Novosilka, he said, about the fact that the Russian army on the Kurakovye sector continues to squeeze, knock our troops off the flanks, and about the threat of encirclement of Покrovsk. The Russian enemy, he says, continues the offensive operation. So what should we do? I have recently met with a significant number of commanders of very different levels, and high level and medium level, and even with junior commanders who work in this section of the front. Therefore, it was possible for me to form such a sufficiently integral vision of what happened there from the words of many Ukrainian servicemen. Today, he says, we will try to explain the complexity of the situation and the decisions that Ukrainian servicemen expect from the High Command in order to stabilize the situation and attempt to defeat the Russian strike group and prevent the Russian enemy from entering the Dnipro region. So the greatest concern is caused by the Velyka or the Great Novosilka. In fact, the Russian enemy presses the flanks and controls them completely. And to enter, to get to Velyka Novosilka, it is now possibly only on foot. At the highest point, according to UNCENSORED, the narrowest place where the Russian enemy tries to close, that is, to surround our units, is a mere 2.2 kilometers apart. 2 kilometers, in fact, separate the Russian enemy from closing the gap there. At the entrance to Velyka Novosilka, our soldiers keep a corridor of about 3.7 kilometers. With the presence of FPV drones, and with the presence of surveillance and reconnaissance drones, this actually means that the Russians have complete fire control over this narrow gap. Russian drones are constantly over the heads of Ukrainian soldiers. There, it is impossible to deploy communication, organize supplies, or to organize a quick evacuation. How can this be kept open, I ask? Mr. Butusov asks, what are all these military educations worth? The military leadership that allows such a critical, catastrophic situation for the Ukrainian troops. And perhaps most notably, he asks, why is there no decision to depart Velyka Novosilka? I want to say that the units of the 110th Mechanized Brigade and the 110th Territorial Defense Brigade were put to defend Velyka Novosilka. I would like to remind you that exactly 1 year ago, the 110th Mechanized Brigade also fought such heavy, very difficult, hopeless battles in the defense of Avdiivka without receiving reinforcements. And the same situation is repeated for over a year now. There are no human replenishments, no fire support, but the order to hold on. So how can they hold on? It is just absurd. I wonder if any of the leaders, commanders, have ever at least once approached a front where the Russians were a mere 2 to 3 kilometers away and experienced the environment under such a dense surveillance of drones. Yet they send the soldiers to perform tasks in such conditions. I am just outraged. And there are still no solutions to this defeat. The perception that troops must fight to the last on any frontier, in any setting, even if surrounded, is pure madness. More than that, it is criminal madness, which undermines the combat capability of the troops, leads to unnecessary losses, leads, as it was in the Bolshevik back in 2014, to the complete depletion of the physical, moral, and mental stability as well as the personnel. It undermines the combat capability and then leads to such consequences as occurred in the Bolshevik, where the troops had to withdraw and which led to the end of the war via the Minsk agreements. Unfortunately, we see that there are no lessons drawn today. There are false assessments of these events of 10 years ago, and thus no conclusions have been drawn. And instead of one the Bolshevik in 2014, Syrskyi is now creating several more this year. I want to now speak about what needs to be done now, from the point of view of the commanders that I have talked to. I have spoken to a lot of commanders, and I think many of the military who saw me understand the dire situation. I want to say to the servicemen that are in this direction that the command staff has a completely clear understanding of what needs to be done. But unfortunately, there is no courage and will to demand and achieve the necessary decisions, because people are afraid and leaders worry about keeping their positions. They are afraid to demand certain decisions and give orders that correspond to the situation. Velyka Novosilka, obviously there is a need for withdrawal. It is necessary to save those soldiers of the 110th Mechanized Brigade and the 110th Territorial Defense Brigades who really need to be withdrawn in order to preserve their lives and the combat capability of these units. Well, how can you continue to fight in such conditions? Why don't the cowards who sit in all the command positions hit the table with their fists and force Zelensky and Syrskyi to give the necessary order to withdraw? Yes, you will lose positions, most likely, but friends, you have to be realistic. Yes, someone has to sacrifice. Either a general who loses his position in his career or his subordinates who lose their lives. Therefore, I appeal to General Alexander Tarnavsky, General Andriy Natov, commanders of the Donetsk OTU and OSUV Kortizha, with an appeal to take responsibility for the lives of our subordinates. If Syrskyi and Zelensky do not understand this, then you must understand it. And someone has to say, I give the order, and let them try to cancel it. So one of the most important things that Yuri Butusov criticized about the Ukrainian command and the regime is the absence of realism in the assessments of what is occurring on the front line. And my friends, this criticism is even more highlighted when we look at how the Ukrainian media is covering the disaster in Velyka Novosilka. Let's have a look at this article from RBC Ukraine. First line reads, "The situation around Velyka Novosilka, Donetsk region remains dynamic and complex. There is a threat of operational surroundings." You heard that right, my friends. A threat of an operational surrounding. That's how they describe the situation currently on this map of Velyka Novosilka. And here is a quote from the article. The OSUV spokesman noted that there is no risk of complete encirclement in Velyka Novosilka, but there is an operational risk. At the same time, the defense forces are making efforts to prevent the occupiers from blocking the approaches to the city, which the enemy is trying to take under control. My friends, look at the map. There is no attempt to prevent the Russians from blocking the approaches to the city. All of the approaches are already blocked. This is delusion. This is hope. This is part of the reason why the Ukrainians are sacrificing so many of their men to stay and fight in cities that any military commander with an inch of logic would know they should retreat. It goes on, in quotations, "It's not really comfortable there. There is also a river flowing, and let's say it cuts the village a little. Therefore, it is a little uncomfortable with maneuvering there. Nevertheless, all these problems are known. They were known before, and actually, options are being developed on how to counteract this," said Tregibov, a Ukrainian serviceman. And here is another assessment from a Ukrainian serviceman and SBU employee, Ivan Stupak. And he gives his opinion of why Russians continue to succeed in encircling towns and villages. And listen to this coup. In quotations, "There is a shortage of personnel. Our military says that there are not enough people, especially on the flanks. There are areas where we can hold back the Russians, but on the outskirts and from the flanks, we lack the manpower. With equipment, things are more or less fine. There are no major complaints, and this allows the Russian troops to push through our defenses and do what they usually like to do, create pockets and encircle us. This has been their standard tactic for over the past year, and unfortunately, it works," he explained. "We saw quite a large area marked in green on the deep state map. Now it has almost returned under Russian control. Well, we understand that there is nothing left in this location. It's just scorched earth, mixed with concrete, the bodies of our soldiers, the bodies of Russians, civilians, and unexploded ordnance," noted the military expert. So gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I made it a bit late because I was busy today looking after my new daughter and my wife, who's recovering from a complicated pregnancy. However, stop and take a look at this video I made right here, which is a trailer telling you about the benefits that you will get from joining the exclusive membership community. You can also look at this video up here, which is the last video I made about Velyka Novosilka some time ago.